Hello, everybody. Thomas Gray was a great poet in 18th century in his time. Thomas Gray was born in 1716, was one of the most learned poets of his age, yet he left very few odes and the Elegy. In his youth, he was very happy and active. He was educated at Cambridge University. He got some sickness in his mind, so he was mentally sick. Sickness that made his creative writing impossible. He got kind of inertia which paralyzed his action and made him unable to write and think well. Thomas Gray became thus in a melancholic gloom. He liked to sit among the graves and used to write there. The Elegy was written in a country churchyard, shows that the dark view of modern life which can be seen through this elegy. What is elegy? Elegy is a poem or a song that expresses or shows sadness, depression, especially someone who has died. Elegy written in a country churchyard is a poem written by Thomas Gray. You as third-year students should keep 4 stanzas. Stanza number 1, 2, 3, 4. What is in the first stanza? The lines. The curfew tolls the knell of parting day. The lowing herd wends slowly over the lea. The ploughman homeward blows his weary way and leaves the world to darkness and to me. Actually, before we explain some details or information about this stanza, we select some words to explain them for the students. For example, like curfew. What does it mean? Curfew in the Middle Ages, in the Middle Times, the ringing of a bell at a certain time in the evening, for example, as a sign for people to put out all lights and cover all fires. Or the word toll, ring with slow, regular strokes. Or knell refers to the sound of a bell rang slowly for death or at funeral, a sign of the death of somebody. What is in the first stanza? The poet Thomas Gray in the first stanza defines the time and the setting. The time and the setting. The word toll and knell, both of them are used to announce the death of a person, but the poet Gray uses them here to announce the death of the day. The poet was at that time standing in the graveyard of the church. He describes the beautiful sights, the common sights of countryside. The mowing cattle move slowly in a crude way through the meadow as they are so tired. The farmers are also walking slowly towards their homes after a long day. Their way is so tired as people come and go all the day over it. All the others go home except the poet. The atmosphere at that time is defined the open lands. All the fields disappear in the darkness, and everything is quiet and silent. There is only flying insect, or you can say there are only flying insects that break the silence of the place and fly in a circular way. Just we find here in the darkness the insects that fly and break the silence of the place. So in first stanza here we can say Gray, as a poet of this poem, used some words that refer to personification. In first stanza we find, for example, the curfew is personified like a priest. The day is given a human quality. Why? Because the day is dying, parting. And also we find way is personified, is given a human quality. Weariness, the way is weary, so tired. Darkness also is personified because all people and animals left the world alone as if it were their friend. Darkness and the poet are eternal friends. Both of them will be in eternal immortalized friends. Second stanza. Now fades the glimmering landscape to the sight, and all the air a solemn stillness holds, save where the beetle wheels in rowing flight and drowsy tinglings lull the distant folds. Again the poet Thomas Gray shows that some elements, some sounds that break the silence of the place. In this stanza, the second sound that breaks the silence of the place is the faint tingling of the bells that comes from a distance. The sheep carry bells around their necks. In the evening they become drowsy, sluggish. That is why the bells tingle faintly, weakly, as if they were tired to lull the fields to sleep. Second stanza also we find, for example, landscape. This word is personified because it fades, vanishes like people. So landscape is given human quality like people. Landscape also leaves the world. And the air at that time refers to a human action, stillness. The word beetle is personified. The beetle is like a man pushing his cart round and round. Beetle creates monotony and also is referred to by his. So the poet here wants to say tingling is also personified. Personified why? Because tingling is drowsy and lull. Both of them are human qualities or actions. And also find faults, personified as a child. The image of a mother lulling to her baby child to put him to sleep. And stanza number 3. Save that from yonder ivy-mantled tower, the moping owl does to the moon complain of such as wandering near her secret bower, molest her ancient solitary reign. Here, in this stanza, Thomas Gray also gives us another kind of noise or sound that breaks the silence of the place. What is it? Another noise breaks the silence of the place, that is the complaining of the gloomy, sad owl coming from the tower of the church, which is covered by ivy. The owl is complaining to the moon, which is also alone, about some insects that come near its bower. Bower refers to a living place. The passage of time, the course of time, is indicated by the moon. Now it is night, it is completely dark. In stanza number 3, actually, we find, for example, the owl is personified. It is complaining. It is given human equality, complaining. Tower is personified because tower here is like, or is a listener. It is listening to this complaint. The moon, for example, also, both of them, the owl and the moon, are lonely and alone in the darkness. But the word rain, this rain, for example, rain is a metaphor for the solitary night. The owl is the queen of the night. But in stanza number 4, beneath whose wrecked elms that yew trees shade, where heaves the turf in many a mouldering heap, each in his narrow cell for ever laid, the rude forefathers of the Hamlet sleep. Hamlet is not a play written by Shakespeare, actually. Hamlet here means small town. Okay? And we know exactly when the poet is standing. When the poet is standing, he looks at the graves that surround him. The graves are underneath elm trees, sheltering with yew trees. These are the graves of the poor villagers who couldn't afford for building graves for their dead. Their graves at that time are not naturally built by rising the ground. When they buried the dead, and the heaps are covered by the dead leaves falling from the trees, the forefathers of that simple village are imprisoned in their narrow cells. Narrow cells or narrow cell means graves. So in stanza number 4 also we find elms. Elms or elm as a kind of tree. Elms are personified. They are like a man with a torn dress, very shabby, very torn or weak. Those trees are very old and usually shake most of their leaves, and nothing remains except a few dead yellow leaves. Also we find another word, narrow cells or narrow cell is a metaphor which refers to the graves, because the poet Thomas Gray wants to compare them to narrow cells, wants to compare the graves to narrow cells. So the imagery used by Thomas Gray in his poem is very important, is rich with different images. Actually, we find the images of death and the images of life. But this poem, first of all, focuses on the images of death, just for third-year students. These images prevail in the first four stanzas. Death in all its aspects, forms, appears as a dominant force in those stanzas. We can find, for example, darkness through the evening. The emptiness of the place is another aspect or form of death. Stillness, and number four, coldness. Those aspects, forms, are presented through the four stanzas in different images. Death is also presented directly through the place, the graveyard. And lastly, it is presented through minute details prevailing in the four stanzas. Such details can be seen in the harsh, ugly, hooting sound of the owl and the monotonous buzzing of the beetles. The owl is also connected with death. It lives in distracted place and it appears mainly at night, and both remind readers of death. The trees, the elms, and the yews also represent death. They die, for example, in the cold season, especially winter. Their leaves fall and all signs of life in them stopped. Thus, their appearance is connected with death. So, you can keep these notes, remarks, as important things in your mind, and they are so important. And thank you so much, my students, to keep this lecture in your mind. Thank you and goodbye.